Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Books, the Hidden Gems author podcast in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today we're delighted to welcome a very special guest, wearing a very special jacket actually, Kristen White, who is a media and marketing expert who is here to tell us all about your book, Beyond Your Book. So Kristen, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm excellent, and I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you for inviting me to this incredible show.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. We are delighted to have you. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well, thank you, Roland, and thanks for joining us, Kristen. So listen, you're like this big media expert on all sorts of fun things. We were just talking about it before we started here, and one of the things you mentioned, which is I like the way you would put this, is that publishing and that your book is like a starting point, and it's not necessarily your finish line. And you talk a lot about how authors can use their book to open doors to other things, whether it's TED Talks or other media, speaking and engagements, consulting gigs, courses, movie deals, whatever it is. So that's the sort of thing I want to focus on today, because I think a lot of authors, they write their book and they don't necessarily go anywhere beyond that, and not that they have to, but I think a lot of the times they don't even realize what all those opportunities are. And especially if not everyone is writing a book every other month, and if they had one big idea and they're not necessarily ready to roll with another thing, it's encouraging to think you don't necessarily have to write another book right away. There are other opportunities for you to go from that starting point. So let's talk about that. First of all, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, well, thank you for all that. My background is TV news. So I was a reporter. I covered the house fires, heartache, and homicide in South Florida and, St. Louis, and did all those things for a long time. And then, I decided that I'd had it with that and then moved on. And for the last 2 decades, actually, I've been working with authors, speakers, and coaches to take their books, take their platforms, their thought leadership, and turn it into a movement, basically, courses, TED Talks, speaking, movie, TV concepts. So really, there's so many different things that you can do. And, I think that it really is just a matter of giving yourself permission to take that message that's inside your book and just let it evolve and treat it really as intellectual property. And what are the options that I can do with this? So, I have a pretty extensive background in media. I do have a documentary film on Amazon Prime right now called Shamanic Trekker, and I've written 3 books myself. So, I've been in the trenches as an author and a creator, but I've also, helped thousands of authors, over the years, imagine what could be next for their books.
I imagine that for fiction authors, the natural thing to think about would be, hey, movie deal, TV series. And honestly, if I was thinking about what I would do with a fiction book, those are the only things that would immediately come to mind. But it sounds like there's probably a lot of other things too. So, if we talk first about fiction, what do you think are the directions people could go that they might not be thinking about?
Well, I think people believe, and the publishing industry has taught them, that they only need maybe 1 or 2 books. And I'm here to tell you that to reach success, the studies show that it's closer to 20 books. So I think especially in fiction, you need to write a series, develop a following, release chapters on Substack, get people behind the characters, get people excited about these characters. And so if you can build momentum, that's really where the doors open, I think, for someone who's a fiction storyteller. We think that a lot of times, oh my God, I have this great story and I'm so afraid to share it because someone's going to steal my idea. And, that's especially true, I think, in the entertainment industry. But the people who are out there doing the movie deals, doing the TV series, they'll just throw their ideas out at a coffee shop and just try to test the idea in the marketplace. So, I don't know Craig or Roland, if you guys have ever read a book and then went and watched the film or watched the TV series, it's not in alignment, right? I mean, sometimes it's like, did they even read this book? Okay.
Yes.
So I think part of it is just to make sure if you do want to go that route, to understand that your story is not precious, right? Like they're going to get in there, they're going to carve it up, they're going to rewrite it, they're going to toss it around. They're going to add the 3, point story arc. So it's, I think, understanding the framework, understanding that you got to get, people behind the story and to care about these characters, and that you're going to need to be a pretty prolific publisher to really get some momentum behind that fiction book.
It's funny that you mentioned that now, because I just started reading the James Patterson books, the Alex Cross books, and I read the first 2, and I know that they had done movies with Morgan Freeman, probably in the 90s, so I went and watched those. I was not happy. Along Came the Spider was almost like they used the title and the character, and sort of like the general idea, but oh my God, it changed so much. It was, I did not enjoy it. So yeah, it's funny that came up, because I've just been dealing with the last couple days where I watched those movies, and I was just like, I was horrified at what they did, and I can't imagine Patterson wasn't happy either. And I think that is a reality. I mean, it's not a one-off. I've watched a lot of things, and often, things get close or not, and there's necessary changes you have to make. The book is often way longer than you could do, so you have to condense things down. But sometimes the creative choices that they make are not within the control of the author, and I think that is something people have to keep in mind. You might be able to fight for that creative control, but probably not the first time out. So what else so let's say you only have one book, then are you saying, pretty much
well, are we talking about fiction, or are we talking
fiction?
about,
Let's just stay on fiction for now, and then we'll move.
Okay.
I know nonfiction is a much wider sort of amount of things you can do with
and I'd love to talk about that in a bit, but I think most
we
people
will absolutely go to that. But I just figure like fiction is a bit tougher, and a lot of our listeners are fiction writers. So I just wanted to sort of talk about that first, and then we can move on to.
Well, I mean, of course, if you've got a great idea and you've got a great book and you've written a book, you have crossed a significant achievement, right? So I don't want to diminish the fact that, yes, you've written an incredible book, you've published it, you've got your story out there. I mean, that's phenomenal. But what I would just encourage you is to just not stop there, right? Because I think that, yes, we have plenty of examples of TV series and things that are created out of one single book. But I will tell you that if you can keep developing that series, developing a following. One of the things that's interesting that's happening in the entertainment industry is there's a lot of like micro series. So these are like, 90-second episodes, 3-minute episodes. So you could take your book and turn it into like these little micro episodes and air those on Instagram, TikTok. There's platforms.
I've seen them on Facebook. I've seen them on Facebook. I get kind of into them.
Yeah, you really get into them. And the key is just to make sure that each little 90-second episode has a cliffhanger, right? So it's just to learn the language of a visual medium, because remember, a book is print, right? We use our imagination to bring the fiction in the book to life. We, imagine the faces of the characters from our own imagination, so it's really a different cast person no matter who's reading the book. So you have to kind of find that visual interpretation of that and then create that in, these little mini episodes, if you will. And that's a great way to build a following. I think you can also make sure you build like a really solid Substack account. You can get people behind the characters on that. If you want to write another book, you can start writing that book. Little small snippets on like Facebook at a time, build your community, build your audience. I think that's probably the most important thing, because you have to remember, a fiction book, may or may not have an intriguing cover and an intriguing title, but the whole story is tucked away inside these pages, right? And that book doesn't have a voice. It doesn't have an actual storyteller. So I would say probably at the minimum, make sure you create an audiobook around that fiction book, because so many people, are really into like listening to the story, right? And we're all hardwired as human beings for story. So if you can tell a good story, you're going to have people that will lean in, to really learn more. And there's also something to be said for this whole concept of open loops, right? So if you plant what's called an open loop, when you're telling your story, and then you say, okay, I'm going to close that loop the next episode, but I'm going to open another one. People will tune in because they literally can't stand it. I mean, this is why, Netflix and Amazon Prime and all those, Hulu, everybody binge watches because they're masterful at these open loops. It's like, will they, won't they?
Cliffhangers, right?
Are they
That's
going to
basically-
survive? Will, is this the end? Are they going to be, life or death consequences? Because
It's
the consequences,
essentially cliffhangers, right?
right? Cliffhangers, but it's even more than just a cliffhanger now. It's more complex. Like, what are the stakes? It's always like, what are the stakes for the main character? That's number one. And if you have a fiction book, can you make people care about the main character? Some main characters are likable and some of them aren't, right? So if you get to the point where you're like rooting for the character, and I'm not telling people to rewrite their books, but the books that do get traction and go viral have some aspect in the character that people connect to, and they're rooting for them. They care about them. So then they're going to keep watching.
Right. I wonder too, it almost sounds like, the media industry has the same sort of concerns that we're seeing in the publishing industry now, where they expect an author to come with their own built-in following, right? And not just a built-in following, but the idea that you have that follow-up. I mean, that's more important with the entertainment industry. But like you're saying, they don't want you to come with one book, because if it's a big success, where do they go from there? I mean, the media industry is so focused on series and sequels, and creating more content when they discover something works.
I mean, Craig, look at Spider-Man, right? Like, how many versions can they do?
Yeah, and they always start from the beginning again. but
day.
It's like they have all those stories, so it helps. Like, and when they made Game of Thrones, they were making up the books, and then they ran out of material, and then look what happened, right? They started the showrunners were writing it themselves, and everyone hated the direction it went.
Yeah,
so,
the last season was a real bomb.
right, because that wasn't what he wrote. It wasn't. So I think I get that from that perspective. If they want to make something out of it, that's why they would rather see that you have a whole bunch of stuff, and that you have a following, because hey, that makes their job easier.
Well, there is a criteria now that, like, what literary agents are looking for. So a lot of times they will literally go to your account. It used to be if you had about 50,000 followers, they would consider representing your book, but now it's up to about 200,000 followers. So they want you to have a pretty substantive base of engaged community. And then even if they do pick up your book, a literary agent, and then they want to present it to sell it, okay, you're still going to be responsible for your own marketing for that book. Okay, so they're not just going to take it over for you. I mean, yeah, they'll kind of maybe put you on a little bit of a tour. They'll build you a website, but they don't really do much more than that. You're still responsible for getting the traction and momentum around your book. Now, I will say, one of the things that I talk about is, entering literary awards. So if you can get that book in there and win some book awards, especially if you just have one book, you got to make sure you apply, because they're not going to know about you if you don't apply. You can win some literary awards. You can get discovered that way, possibly for, maybe a TV project or something else. Okay. But you have to find ways to get out into the mix so that people can discover you and find out about, the story that you're trying to tell.
Right. And a lot of that requires you to have an agent. And, a lot of our audience are self-publishers, right? So I think there's probably, it's not that there's no path forward for self-publishers, but I think that there are extra steps involved for a self-publisher rather than somebody who's traditionally published.
I mean, I'm self-published. I self-published my first book, Mystic in a Minivan, and I've done a lot of things with it. Like I wrote a script around it. I turned it into a one-woman show. I took it and pitched it to, different TV series there's a platform you can use called Stage 32. They have live pitch sessions, and I was able to, get a lot of script requests. I actually went back to school and got a certificate in television writing at UCLA during COVID for a year. So I wrote a whole pilot around that book. And then I had other book ideas. So I wrote 3 pilots that year, and I pitched that pilot, and I actually got it optioned and purchased. So there is a path that you can take as a self-published fiction author, but it's not passive. Okay. And that's the thing I just want to put forward. I think that when you're an author, and I've written books, you kind of want to get in the zone, and it's this creative, beautiful, imaginary journey, and you're just writing your chapters, and it's a totally introspective inner conversation you're having with yourself that's like flowing out to the page. And I want to touch base on something you said earlier is, people finish that book, they hand it over, they get it published, self-published or hybrid publishing or with an agent, and they're like, okay, it's out there across the finish line. But what I found in my work with authors is most people don't even do a book launch. Okay. They don't even go through the process of like actually launching the book, and the basic things like building reviews and, sending out copies to people and trying to get in the media. Maybe they do a couple of, social media posts the week the book comes out, right? Or they pay someone to do a bestseller campaign, but that only really lasts that bestseller status like one day or a week, depending on what categories that you're in. So you have to really, put on a different hat than the authorship hat and get into, okay, this book is finished. Now it's my IP, my intellectual property. Where do I want to take it next? Do I want to expand the story? Do I want to write a pilot on it? You're a writer, right? Like, do you want to write a pilot about it? Okay. And, do a little bit of study around it. Do I want to pitch it somewhere? Do I want to just take this series forward? Do I want to make it into a micro series that I'm airing on social media or YouTube? Like, so I think it's like, you're not done. The publish industry tells everyone, okay, congratulations, you're done. The big thing is the publishing. It's a big money business. It's a big money business. Self-publishing, you'll pay $5, $10, $15, $20,000 to get that book published, ghostwritten, out there, nice looking cover. And then it's like you have crossed the finish line, and that's it. And that is not it. That's just the beginning. And I think that you have to, really believe in your project and keep developing it in whatever way feels aligned for you to move it forward. But I don't think self-publishing is bad. I actually think it's the way to do it. But it requires you to continue that self-momentum that made you finish the book in the first place.
Yeah, and I think, I think that the way I'm thinking of it is more that small person, that small publisher, that small author that writes their one book, doesn't spend all that money. They wrote it themselves. Maybe they pay a little bit of money to get it edited and the cover design, but we're talking hundreds or $1,000, not necessarily $20,000. But I do agree that a lot of authors think that launching your book means hitting publish on KDP, and it's that technically launches your book. But when we talk about the book launch, we're talking about how do people know that it used to be back when Roland and I started, you could hit publish and your book would, without any advertising, people would find it because it was so new and there weren't that many books. Now you hit publish, it's a drop of water in the ocean, right? Nobody knows that it's there.
It's about 1.2 million self-published books a year.
Right. So I still have authors come to me and say, hey, I published my book, but it doesn't seem like anyone's, finding it or whatever. I'm like, what are you doing? And like, well, like they're not promoting it. I'm like, you got to tell people that it exists.
You can promote it. I mean, even a low cost. So Amazon offers Amazon ads.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do, it's not very much. I mean, what, $5 a day or something like that?
You can do Amazon ads, Facebook ads, you can do
do a
newsletters,
low cost
you can
ad. I think that's helpful. Make sure that you go out in the community and do some readings. Like they'll have readings at your library and in different community things like that. I mean, you can create your own momentum around that book. So I think that, and for fiction, people do want to have these stories online. So again, turn that into an audiobook, definitely. And then, take pieces of that story, even if you're just reading it with like, a fixed, you don't have to have a lot of fancy graphics, but now with AI, you can create any kind of good looking graphic around your book and then just read, you could literally upload your read chapters and they will make a video to match it. Right. I mean, really, I think the opportunities, with a Claude Pro account for $20 a month is phenomenal.
Well, even going simpler than that, I remember one of the first podcast episodes we did was with this author. She'd had a book out 4 years, I think it was. And then she sat down to do a TikTok where she basically just told the premise of the story and as if it was really happening to her. And then she was like, oh, this is a book. And that was enough to make her go viral. And that book that was 4 years old suddenly went to #1 and got optioned for a movie. So, you don't need to use AI. You don't need to get fancy with graphics. You can just pitch it.
Yeah. But it's the point that I made earlier, Roland, is like your story is locked inside those pages. It's in the it's between the covers, right? So her book took off when she started speaking about it aloud, right? Like, and I think that's the key distinction. So you can make it fancy with tools. You can just start telling the story on TikTok. I mean, there's no right or wrong way. It really just depends on what you want to do. But the key is to give that book a voice.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think part of it, it's fun. I think so many authors forget about doing that. They write a book, they publish it, and then it's kind of disappointing when it just like languishes. Whereas even if maybe it doesn't become a bestseller or anything like that, if you organize for yourself a book launch in a local bookstore or something like that, it kind of makes you feel like an author. And I think it's worth doing that because, that then you are inhabiting and living the dream that you had, which is what you inspired you to write this book in the first place.
Well, especially if you apply for these awards and you go to the book festivals and, I talk about this. I have some playbooks that are free. And one of those is to go on an author road trip, right? So if you apply for, and this is fiction and nonfiction. So if you want to apply for awards and, go on a book tour in the summer and go to all the literary festivals and talk to your fans and, those options are available for people who've written books. You just have to make a decision that that's what you're going to do. And then, put forth, apply and get accepted and then make those plans.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always, the rules around everything are always changing, right? And so people have to keep on top of that. One of the things I thought I should bring up is something I read and I posted about it in my newsletter last week, but Barnes & Noble recently changed their rules around who they accept to do book signings in their stores. And it used to be pretty much anybody could do it. Now you have to actually prove that you have a following because they're kind of tired of just somebody coming who just wrote a book, has no readers, and they come in, they want to do a book signing. They're not bringing anything to the store, but the store still has an expense of running that. And so now they're saying, okay, no, I don't know what the qualifications are, how you prove it, but they do want, they will only accept now authors that can show that they can bring something to the table, literal table, when they're doing their launches and their signings. So, you have to sort of keep in tune with what's going on in the industry because everything changes so much. Okay, so let's move to nonfiction, right? I know there's a lot more opportunities around that. We've had some guests on where we've talked more specifically about nonfiction, but that's one of those things that a lot of people use to launch other parts of their career. It's like writing a book is not their end goal. Their end goal is becoming an expert in something, and they write the book as one of the things they do, whereas with fiction, it's often the opposite, where writing the book was your goal, and you got to do those other things to promote the book. So it's kind of flips that, right?
Well, I mean, I think in nonfiction, especially if you want to use that book as a tool, it definitely becomes more of a business card for you. You know what I mean? So you can sell your nonfiction book for $25, but it may lead to 100,000, 500,000, $1 million of revenue, right? From coaching programs, workshops, private clients, speaking fees. So, that book, I think that what I always say to my clients in nonfiction is who tell me they want to be a thought leader. It's like, well, you have to have a place where people can actually consume your thoughts, right? You can't be a thought leader if all the thoughts are tied up in your head and they're not anywhere where someone can like read about them or understand them and, really come around to your point of view. And more specifically, the best nonfiction books solve a problem for people, right? So if you have a burning issue and you see a book title that like speaks to that issue, you might pick it up, at the airport and read it on the plane. You might go out and order that book. So I think that books, so there's two types of nonfiction books, there's memoirs, right? And then there's these books that are more, educational, informative, self-help, personal development. There's a whole kind of category inside there. So, what I'm talking about is the let me help you solve a problem kind of books of nonfiction. And, it's a different discussion, I think, about memoirs, which also fall in the category of nonfiction.
Yeah, they do, but I wonder if they're sort of closer to the fiction category when it comes to the opportunities what you want to do with them. Then
I think so.
Yeah, because I agree. Like what I'm thinking about are the the problem-solving books, the ones that people run do their speaking engagements around and give everyone a free copy, like you said.
Well, I'll give you an example. I worked with an author recently who had a really incredible life story. He was traveling around the whole world, and he went through Syria and he got kidnapped. And so he disappeared, and his family could not get help from the State Department. They could not find any help, so they had to go out on their own and work with detectives, the Vatican, like all these different organizations to finally bring this guy home. And now, he's a public speaker and he speaks on the topic of uncertainty, right? So it is a memoir. And you can imagine if you're captive in Syria and wondering if you're going to be beheaded, there's a lot of uncertainty around that. And he has an invitation to turn, it's only one book. So, leaning into what you were talking about, one book. Leaning into that, he has an agent who's going to work with him to maybe sell this story. So, I mean, depending on the memoir, if it's a really compelling, gripping story, you can take themes out of that. Now, I will say from a consulting business for his, he speaks at about 60 different places a year. So he's making really good money doing that. But he's already writing a second book that's more about the business principles of uncertainty. So you do have to take that memoir and evolve it if you want to use it as like a thought leadership tool.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's really creative, sort of twisting around of this thing happens and then he makes a career out of it by focusing on that uncertainty principle that underlied it, whereas other people would be just oh my God, this happened to me, and then that would tell their story and go on some talk shows and tell their story some more. But I think that's a really creative turn to turn that into, hey, now I'm going to talk about uncertainty. That's interesting.
Well, I think that all authors are artists, right? There's an artistry in how they use their words. And so I think anyone who's an author, Craig, has the capacity to be wildly creative. They just have to take it and think of it as a puzzle, if you will. And what other facets or aspects can I create out of this creative vision that came to me to inspire me to write this book? So I do believe that authors are inherently creative, and disciplined and have that. So I do think that they can figure it out if they just kind of trust themselves to stretch a little bit and say, what else can this book become? What opportunities or doors would I like it to open for me in my life? And, make a set point with that vision, because I do think having a vision and manifesting where you want something to go does play a pretty big role in the level of success you'll have towards getting there. So if you just kind of publish a book and put it out there and say, oh, I hope it goes somewhere, I hope somebody reads it, well, that's about the result you're going to get, right? If you put a book out there and you say, you know what, someday I'm going to do a TEDx on this, or this is going to be, a platform that inspires people, and I'm going to have a huge following and do workshops on it. And you set your mind to that and you work on the framework for that, that's probably going to happen. Right. So I think that the energy behind it and the intention behind it does play a big role in any book's success.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I was more thinking about just, I think not everybody would go in the direction of, I can turn this into more than just a book. If they have thought to themselves, I'm going to do that, then sure, their creativity
Right.
could lead them to do that. But some people just stop at, I put my creativity into writing the book, and then here's my book, and then that's just a mental thing where it's just like that's it. But if somebody said, what else could you do with that, then they might be. But for me, it's like I wouldn't have even thought to start what other sort of opportunities could this do. I would be thinking, oh, I wrote this book. I think it's a different kind of creativity to think outside the box that way, and just go in a different direction than what most people are going, because it's so much easier to follow the herd, right? that mentality of this is what generally happens. You write a book, you promote the book, and you move on to the next book, and there are these other paths, and that's sort of what we're talking about. So I think it's great. Speaking of TEDx, unrelated question, what's the difference between a TED Talk and a TEDx talk? Let's just get that out of the way.
Just the size of the platform. So like TED is like the premier.
Okay.
Usually they're in bigger cities globally, but really any city in the US can have a TEDx. Each one is individually run and operated. So they have different administrative people who run it. You're only allowed
franchises.
It's not a franchise. You have to apply to TEDx to be in charge of the TEDx.
Oh.
And then each individual TEDx has a theme.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're applying to the TEDx, you have to apply to each individual TEDx, and you really want kind of the intersection of your big idea. So the TEDx is one big idea, and you want the intersection of that idea to match, if you can, the theme of the TEDx. So you need to apply to each one independently.
Okay. And then what do you get from that aside, or maybe the main thing is that publicity and the fact that people watch it and say, hey, I want to read this guy's book, or if you're selling some other part of your business, or do you get something else from it?
Well, not every TEDx is based on a book. So not every TEDx speaker has a book, right? So I think if you, and not every TEDx talk is, so a TEDx is not a book report, right? Like, so it's, people aren't going to show up and just read through their book. They're going to take one single idea or theme from that book and turn it into a TEDx. Okay. So it could be even the smallest little paragraph hidden on, page 89 that you decide to do a TED talk about. Okay. So I think that that's first, the way to think about TEDx. So what does a TEDx do for you? Well, not every TEDx has 1 million views. There's a lot of TEDx's that don't even have very many views. And a lot of that has to do with probably, unfortunately, in the world we do today, your title. So if you have a really good, compelling title, you're going to get more views on your TEDx. And again, these are the titles that like solve problems for people, and there are certain topics in TEDx that are more viral, if you will, than other topics. Right. So I think, it really comes down to, yes, you speak on a TEDx stage for anywhere from 6 minutes to 15 minutes. You have that little clip. It is definitely a feather in your cap. It's a career credential if you want to have it that way, but that's about all that it does. You have to also do something with that as well.
Right. So when you're working with an author, that comes to you and wants to, turn their book into a bigger bigger thing, bigger reach, a better platform. And where do you start? You know, what sort of like, you must have some certain things that you have to sort of iron out, and then that determines the direction that you take them, I assume.
Well, I think it just depends on where they're at in the process with the book, right? So like, there's authors who just have the idea for the book, but they haven't written it yet. There's authors that are almost finished with their book and they're getting ready to launch it in like, say, 90 days. There's authors who've written a book and it's been out for a couple years. So I think that, like, first of all, we have to determine where in the lifespan as an author they are, and then I think authors have different goals for themselves. So it's really just determining, what's the goal? I mean, I would say the most obvious goal for any author is they want to boost their book sales, right? Authors want to sell more books and, have people know about them. They, a lot of people who write books, I mean, even fiction books, that, they want to improve the world in some way or entertain the world or tell a story. And so they want the world to hear that story, so people want to make an impact with that book. So, I think the biggest thing around that is, well, how can you make an impact? Well, you have to increase your visibility. So whether that is, doing podcasts like what we're doing right now, or, starting a Substack, or doing a media tour of any kind of thing where you're on like local TV or national TV, or, published in magazines or whatever, that always amplifies your visibility. If they need help with their social media, some authors don't post on social media at all, right? They're not on TikTok. They're not on Instagram. They're not on Facebook. They don't even have a picture of their book anywhere, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that don't even have like that banner with the book on Facebook. If they want to just get visibility, sometimes we do a low cost ad combined with other things. So I think it really depends on what's already in place, and then what the goal is of where they want to go next. There's so many different things that you can do. And it really does depend between like nonfiction, memoir, and fiction as well. To your point earlier, there's a lot you can do with a nonfiction book. You can go and write a keynote speech. You can create a coaching program. You can create workshops. You can create all kinds of things out of the intellectual property inside that nonfiction book.
Yeah. So what is your sort of role with authors? It's like, so you figure out that you collect that information, figure out maybe what the best path is forward, based on their goals and all those things. Do you then just sort of like give them, point them in the right direction, or do you actually work with them to book like a TED Talk, or
Right.
create the materials they want?
So I have a full service marketing agency. So it's called Orange Cat Media and Marketing Agency. So we, do everything from taking that book and, again, putting authors on, what I call either a digital media tour, where they go and appear on podcasts, Substack, newsletters. We pitch them to about 300 outlets across 3 months. So that's a lot of visibility for them. Not everybody wants to feature that person, but it does get them out there with some organic media. Authors can definitely pay for media, but it's much more fun if you just get invited on. So I focus on organic media. My background in TV news, I have a lot of journalist contacts. And then the other thing that we do is we do like the back end stuff. If an author needs a website, especially now, in the land of AI, you need that alt text behind your website so that your stuff comes up in search engines. Just recently, one of my clients is like, yeah, this person called me and they said, yeah, I searched for a topic and you came up first in the AI search. And he's like, I never have come up like that before, but he just had an optimized brand new website. I think a lot of authors build their own websites. You just go to Squarespace or whatever, but if it's not AI optimized and you don't have enough content on there, you're not going to show up in the search. You're not going to rank. And that's what I call your digital authority. So you do need to, depending on your topic, make sure that you are found in, these modern search engines. That's really important. You can also do small ads, Amazon ads, Google ads, If you, have any kind of services, you can do Yelp ads. And some of those are as low as $6 a day. So, and we're not talking about massive budgets, but there are things that you can do to get yourself visible. And then, you can also do more organic things. Again, making videos, posting, talking about your book. I think it's just a matter of like having a full, comprehensive, like holistic strategy and knowing again where you want to go with this. And then you almost reverse engineer how to get there.
Do you get really, yeah. Do you get really hands-on? Like, do you run the ads for them, or do you?
We can, yeah, we'll run the ads for them, or I personally pitch all the media campaigns. I mean, I think most people want visibility.
Right.
So I like to, personally pitch them. So what we do is when we're going to do a media campaign, we do an expert positioning interview. So I read their book, I interview them for about an hour. And then I take that interview and I take the book and I merge it together and I create a media blueprint where I intersect like the current trends in media, what they had to say. I recommend sound bites for them. So they have a whole, probably 20-page thing that they can use to decide, okay, this is what I'm actually going to talk about. And then I go out and create them the media materials. Like I sent you guys a media kit. They have a media webpage. And then I pitch them and then follow up, and then they get to book the time that they're going to appear on there. So it's pretty hands-on, it's pretty comprehensive. But I think that's what it takes to get noticed. You can't just send out a simple press release. It's like, oh yeah, Roland's book is out. Hope someone's gonna pick it up. You gotta like get out there and, work it a little bit and get people excited about it and explain it. Again, just like the TEDx, you have to make the book match the platform. The book needs to match the show. The book has to appeal to the host, right? So everything, I think, even in the land of AI, it's still more customized because we've become highly specialized. There's millions of podcasts on these micro topics. So there's a lot of really specific niches out there. So if you can get in a little vein of gold, your book can completely blow up, but it's like getting specific and finding that little cluster of raving fans.
Yeah, there's a lot to do.
Well, there is a lot to do. There is a lot to do. But I mean, again, you think of how much you had to do to write that book in the first place.
It's interesting. There seems to be this underlying message that part of it is you write a book, you need to put it out there. You need to talk about it. You need to not be afraid. I think a lot of authors, they write the book and that's it. But here we're saying like you need to talk about it, engage with people, make them. And I think that takes a lot of authors out of their comfort zone, but that really does seem like something that makes a difference.
Well, I think it makes a big difference. And I think it can be hard because, again, a lot of people who like to write, and I'm not making assumptions, might be introverted, right? So there's that confidence that, oh, wow, I got to get out there and, pitch myself or make a video or apply for something. And so I think that, you either can kind of work through that or you can have somebody else do it for you, right? So I'm probably the do it for you person that's like, okay, let me pitch you on your behalf. But I do think it does require that little bit of a shift in your thinking because a successful book is not, launched by a passive author. So, you got to kind of get your hustle going and get out there and make connections. And you do have to do it while the book is fresh, if you can. That guest you had on is probably an exception who then started reading about the book and, blew up on TikTok, but that's probably an exception. I think that, you have these windows. It's about 90 days up before the book publishes, and then probably about 6 months after, maybe a year, where you have this, it's fresh, you've got like good momentum. And a lot of people don't think about that 90 days before that book goes live, building audience, building momentum, talking about it. They wait and they're like, okay, it's out. Now what? And I think that that's just, it's important to understand that there's this parallel course that you run as an author, and it really is up to you. What do you want it to do for you? Because it can do a lot of things. It's a pretty powerful vehicle. It's quite an accomplishment, and I don't want to underplay that, because if someone had the time and energy and creativity and artistry to sit down and write a book, that's phenomenal. it's hard work. Any one of us who's an author knows how hard it is to actually cross that finish line. So not diminishing that, but I'm saying if you want to leverage that, stand on top of that accomplishment, then there is more to do and more you can do, but you have to kind of break through whatever your personal inner limitations are so that you can go do that.
I think that's phenomenal advice. We are unfortunately reaching the top of the hour, but that's
Yes.
almost like the perfect nugget of wisdom to end on. So before, Kristen, we ask you to tell everyone where they can go and find out more about you. Craig, do you have any final questions?
No, I mean, listen, I agree with that last point. I can't tell you how many people come to us to use, like, for instance, the ARC service, and they're like, oh, my book comes out in a couple days, or it just came out, and it's like, yeah, well, we book out pretty far in advance because other authors, realize that they've got to book all these things, all these promotions ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
And it's very hard to get something last minute in there, so you do have to plan ahead for sure. So anyway, thanks for coming on and explaining all this to us. It's really been interesting discussion. And I think it's going to be helpful for a lot of authors to really understand that things don't end when you hit publish, and often you needed to do some things before that too. So like this will hopefully get some people thinking a little bit more about that. So thanks for coming on.
So, Kristen, for everybody who is listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube, where can they go to find out more about you, more about the services you offer, how you can help them find the success that they want?
Yeah, thank you, Roland and Craig. So I have put together an amazing resource for authors. It's totally free. They're 4 playbooks, okay? And so the first one is Boost Your Book Sales. It's all about getting in the media, creating those sound bites, how to pitch yourself. The next one is called Author Road Trip. It's a whole directory of all the places that you can go out and go on tour with your book. The third one is Get the Recognition Your Book Deserves. It's a whole list of links to apply for awards. And then the last one is Turn Your Nonfiction Book into a TEDx Talk, and it's all on how to do that. So this is at my website, beyondyourbestseller.com. And they're all free. All you got to do is opt in. And I also have a free school community that you can join called Business Beyond Your Book. And you'll find out about that when you go get the playbook. So, I am a good resource for authors. I'd love to brainstorm about ideas that you can do. And then from there, if you want to have a visionary author discovery call with me, you'll get some information on how to book that. And that's complimentary as well.
Well, fantastic. We will pop a link down in the description down below. So if you have enjoyed and valued everything that Kristen has shared with us today, make sure you scroll down there, click on that link, and go and check out her website. And while you're down there, you will pass that big empty comment section. So make sure you leave Kristen a comment and let her know how much you appreciated everything she shared with us today. And while you're down there, there's also that subscribe button if you haven't already. You can smash that like button, as the kids say, and there is that bell icon that you can click to get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, there will be a brand new episode of Fully Booked coming out next week. So until then, cheerio.